The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. I call myself a story maker because I know that every interaction is an opportunity to make a story. And every action and behavior in my life also contributes to my story, my identity, how I experience myself, and how other people perceive me. So when you decide to be a story maker, remember that every action is an opportunity to make the stories and the labels and the impact that you want to have on your community and the people around you. Today's episode is with my new friend, Nir Megnazi, and he reached out to me and said, here's something that I do that's a little unique, and I think your listeners would really find value in hearing it. And I decided he was right. And we met on LinkedIn, and listeners, you're in for a treat today. Nir, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we already started. We had the beginning of a conversation, listeners, and you've probably heard me say this before. I wish I had hit record the moment we opened our windows, because just like as I was expecting, based on the interactions that we've had so far, we launched immediately into meaningful, thoughtful conversation. So listeners, you're really in for a treat today. So Nir, let's just jump right in. I would love for you to share something with our audience that most people might not know about you. And for our listeners who haven't heard this show before, I asked this question to give some context for what you're going to hear later in the conversation. We have a tendency these days to anchor people in time by one experience we have with them, whether it is a single Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram post, or one interaction in one location, forgetting that each of us is complicated. So when we anchor somebody in time like that, we reduce our opportunities for connection and love. So Nir, what do you think? Do you have something to share with us?
First, just saying thank you. This really touched my heart, how you opened all this. We are limiting everyone, and we assess everyone based on what we see in the first second, is friend or foe. So let's start with that. What many people don't know about me, maybe my closest friends do, is that I'm a martial artist. I've practiced martial arts for over 25 years. I'm a done da-da-da-da-dam in this system of a da-da-dam. It doesn't really matter, because my goal is not to impress people. The reason why I picked up martial arts is because I was afraid. At the age of 14, I was bullied by two kids in middle school. One I could take on, and I had enough courage to take him on, but his friend was a mountain. Like, I could never beat him, doesn't matter what I've done. So I spent about a year or two being bullied almost daily, humiliated. And it created a lot of fear and anger in me that I did not know and I could not name when I was so young, just at the age of 13 and 14. Mm-hmm. After my army service and a couple of more years in university, I had the opportunity to pick up martial arts. And I immediately jumped on the opportunity. Only lately, I think probably in the last 4 or 5 years, when I thought that I have enough courage and skills to fight whoever's gonna bully me or attack me, I learned that I'm actually still afraid. I'm much more skilled dealing with people who threaten me in many, many ways. Like, I have the confidence, but that does not eliminate fear. Fear still resided in me because I never accessed it. I never dove into the fear, welcomed it as part of me. I was always trying to fix it, to solve it, to stop it, to make it go away. So yes, I'm a very, very highly skilled martial artist, but for a long time I was still afraid.
Wow. I'm associating the word shame with that because I think a lot of people have shame around feeling fear.
Yes.
Which I think is so sad. I mean, when you think about it, fear is such an evolutionary trait to protect us. To have shame around it is like being ashamed that you have brown eyes, or being ashamed for having size 7 or 8 feet, right? Like it is a part of us, and it is part of our identity. And if we don't embrace it, then we are limiting our potential for connection and confidence.
Yes. And we have this paradox with fear. So I've come from a long military service in Israel. And in every military, I think, organization in the world, or any first responders, and in our society, Western society especially, we look up to leaders who are what I call calm under fire or calm under stress.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at those leaders who operate calmly when the stakes are high, when things change rapidly, but they're grounded, they're there, they're operating. It's like nothing is happening. They're in the center of the storm. They're in the eye of the tornado, but they're so calm. We look up to them. And the trait that we link to that is courage. And here's the paradox. Courage does not exist without fear. It just does not. If I'm not afraid, why do I need courage? But if I have fear is part of my experience, I embrace it. And instead of letting fear control me, I operate within the fear and make decisions, not to stop the fear, but to further the situation, to solve the situation, to get us to somewhere else. Now I'm using courage.
Mm-hmm.
So courage does not exist without fear. And that's the biggest paradox of our society, I think, with fear today.
It's interesting. I keep coming back to this idea that you had this fear that you were being bullied, and every day you'd be anxious about what was going to happen this time. What are they going to do to me this time? And living at that high cortisol level for a couple years in a row of just not knowing is terrifying and frustrating, and can affect all aspects of your mental capacity. I mean, you can't fully learn when you're operating at that level of stress, the cortisol flowing in your brain from fear. So fast forward to this, you'd been doing martial arts for, 5 or 6 years. And for some reason, something happened that you realized, as good as I am at this, I still haven't addressed why I'm doing it. I still haven't looked at the underlying reason I'm doing it. So what happened that you realized, oh, I need to acknowledge that I'm doing this because I'm afraid, or I was afraid, and I never talked about it or embraced what happened to me. What happened?
So 20 years later into my martial artist practice, I was already a coach, a leadership coach. And I went to this training, and this amazing coach did a demo of his coaching. His name is Nicolas Yanni. Today he's my teacher. I follow his teaching. He did a coaching session in 20 minutes that made my jaw drop. As a coach, being taught what I call the traditional ways of coaching, we started with, what is your goal? And we slowly started to unpack why there is a challenge right now. What are the underlying beliefs? And very often I would finish a coaching session feeling that the end result that we achieved, what was the underlying reason why this person in front of me was struggling, I already had this intuition about it when I started. And I was frustrated. How do I get to that position quicker? And when I saw Nicolas coach, it was that. He used his intuition, his energy, and a lot of other stuff. But in 20 minutes, he went so deep, so precise. I describe it as emotional acupuncture.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I need to learn that. So I reached out to Nicholas and I said, Nicholas, teach me. And I joined his coaching practice and coaching training program. And in the program, we were asked to shift our focus inwards, first to our body. What are our physical sensations? And after that, as we got better in even recognizing what is happening within my body, what are the emotions that already exist in us? So with practice and deepening, I started to identify that I have this frequency of fear in me that is always there, and it's operating unconsciously. And I'm reacting to this frequency all the time, trying to stop it. So with Nicholas' help in one of our sessions, we touched it and we went back to that age of 14 when I was helpless and I was afraid and I was angry. And we simply allowed it to be. We allowed me in that session with his holding to feel what I couldn't feel so strongly then and had to overcome just to survive. Because I didn't have the system, the holding, the environment to hold my big emotions at that point.
Wow. There's so much in this story, Nir. I keep thinking about, A, the best coaches are the ones that are continually being coached. And B, how amazing it is when we find the program that we need to learn enough about ourselves to be more of service to others. So when I first looked at StrengthsFinder as a tool, I asked somebody who had gone through it, and I said, what were your thoughts about this? And why did you do it? And he said, well, I did it because I wanted the credential and he knew it was a good tool. And he said, but really, as much as I love the tool, what I really got out of it was I learned a lot about myself. And I thought, oh, okay, I get that, because I'm one of those people that's constantly internal dialogue about what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, mostly what I'm doing wrong. But I remember this moment of going to the training. I decided, after talking it through and looking at all different kinds of assessments and what I wanted to specialize in, and I really love the approach of StrengthsFinder. This whole holistic, this is how you approach problem solving in your most natural way. And here's how you can use it more intentionally. And here's where you might be getting in your own way because of the way you think about things. And like you, my first coach in 10 minutes changed my life just by saying, you're like Speedy Gonzalez. And then she went on to describe how my strategic and activator have a tendency to think too fast without embracing other people in decisions and discussions. And when I think about your story and talking to Nicholas, that was the first thing that came to mind. Was I went into it, I just need this certification so I can get my foot in the door with these agencies. But in that week, it was definitely more internal focus. Like, you cannot be a good coach if you don't know yourself.
And keep doing the work, because we're so multi-layered. And I have a question for you, Sarah. When this coach in those 10 minutes touched something that was so true for you, something that you recognized as your own truth, what happened to you energetically in that moment?
It was like this relief that I wasn't broken, that this was actually something I'm really good at. I just need to fine tune it. And honestly, this is something I work on, and I'm sure I would love to hear how this happens with your clients. One of the things that happens with this assessment is some people get very hostile when they see the results, because these are the things they were criticized for, because other people don't think that way. And so they would be like, oh, that's wrong. You can't do it that way. That's not how you should approach it. And they get should all over. You shouldn't do this. You should do that. So they see these results and they're like, oh no, command? that's a burden. That's not a strength. Can we move this down on the list? It's like, no, that's not how this works. However, I think that was what it was for me, was this realization that all these things I was criticized for, she helped me uncover piles of evidence, stories that vastly outnumbered the negatives that were positive. This is where it showed up in the best possible way. And there were way more of those than there were the negative ones. So tell me, when you think about this, I'm still back in the schoolyard with these bullies. That's where I'm visually stuck. When you think about afterward, when you were no longer, maybe you weren't in school with them, or they found somebody else to pick on, or whatever that was, were you the person who then looked out for other people? Did you go internal and try just to be small? What was, and if you don't want to answer this, I totally understand, but
very few things I refuse to answer.
Good.
And it's a question that requires me for a second to reflect in.
Mm-hmm.
I think I grew up in a house that was more sensitive to others than, let's call it, the norm.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because I've seen my father lead in his factory and how he cared for employees, and I think I inherited that from him. And I'll give him the entire credit for it. And yes, I was probably much more sensitive to see others being picked on.
I ask you that because there was a time where I was being bullied and I got mean. I bullied with them because I was being bullied. And then there was another time where I disrupted that cycle and started making friends with other people who were being bullied. But I remember, I look back at some of those really cringy moments as a kid where I allowed that bad behavior to seep in and bring me right down into the mud with them. So I'm seeing these, I can see the patterns in my life where that happened. So that's why I'm asking you that question.
If I may, for a second, the way I approach these memories is with a lot of compassion to ourselves,
mm-hmm.
which is what we're lacking first,
right.
Compassion to ourselves. Sarah, you were trying to survive.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have the environment that would hold you emotionally with the intensity of the emotions that you were feeling back then.
I was a child.
Yes.
That's where I come from. I was like, I was a child. It doesn't make it less cringy. And I wouldn't want to not think of it as cringy. And at the same time, yes, I see myself as a very petite girl, which that alone was at risk. I mean, I think about all the times people picked me up when I didn't want to be picked up because I was the smallest person in class. So I hear you.
And how it made you feel in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
One of the key principles that I've learned from Nicholas is there are no such things as bad emotions.
Mm-hmm.
People say, oh, that's a negative or a bad emotion. Like fear is bad, or anger is bad, or even shame and guilt are bad. They're not bad. First, they exist. They're human. It's part of who we are as humans. They are highly uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And because we don't know how to include them in our day-to-day, in our human experience, we try to stop them. And if we have these emotions in very high doses where our system, especially when we're kids, cannot tolerate this amount of emotion, that energy, we will do whatever we can to survive. And with you, it seems like in order to empower yourself, not being the victim, stopping the sensations of victimhood, the shame, the helplessness,
Mm-hmm.
you were trying to figure out, without guidance, you're trying to figure out how you can stop yourself being victimized. And that is switching sides. So we need to truly give ourselves compassion to our very innocent tries to survive, especially without guidance. We also need to be compassionate to our parents because most of them did not know how to hold us themselves. They were holding their own trauma, their own hardships. I think
I also think that especially at teen years, I wasn't going to go home and tell my mom what was happening. So she couldn't have known. There's no way.
Yeah.
So there's no way to hold space for somebody and those emotions if they're not sharing them with you. I mean, you can see some of them, but if she had asked, I would not have answered. So there's that. And that's why I asked that question, which when you had been bullied by those people, by those boys, looking back, I could see so many different potential responses from you. But let's switch gears a little bit. What if we move forward into a time where you witnessed it as an adult?
I think it always triggers those moments of victimhood.
Mm-hmm.
And your heart goes to that person who's being bullied. And because I couldn't fix it myself, I would try to fix it for others. All of that unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember a specific place, but I remember that I always listened to people. I was more curious about the backstory. I want to know more about why they're having a struggle and really wanting to help. Some people would say that I'm a recovered pleaser today. So I was a pleaser. By helping others, I would get the love that I couldn't get when I was younger or didn't get at school, although I did. I was just not open to it. And by helping others, I was feeling the love. But it was conditional.
Yourself.
And protecting myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I can say with martial arts, I became a teacher after a while. And I was so dedicated to help people know the art, but when they were having hardships, help them, support them, and they felt the love from me and my dedication. When deep inside, I was compensating for how I felt.
Right. So now we're full circle back to the change that happened between beginning your martial arts journey and then hitting that point where you realized, oh, I'm doing this because I have this holdover fear from when I was a kid. So now we are at that point again. What changed in your martial arts practice after you had that aha time, the moment, and then subsequent coaching through Nicholas? What changed?
One thing that changed is, first, I'm more compassionate towards myself when I don't succeed. It's not a matter of life and death anymore. If I get hit, it's not that the skies are not falling. I just got hit.
Mm.
The fear is not triggered so profoundly. And the same for others, because I can detect fear because of my fear. What is the fear that I had? I'm not saying that I've solved all of it. There are probably more and more layers of it. And not just fear, but sheer terror that are residing in me in some very, very deep levels. So just 2 days ago, I was teaching a class, and we were using this pool noodle as a stick, just because we want to keep them safe. But when you hit, even with a pool noodle, it hurts. And I could see the fear in people's eyes. And I just stopped and said, our job is not to stop your fear. Your fear is normal. I am afraid. As your teacher, I'm afraid when I get hit, I flinch. Our goal is to learn to work with fear and within fear, not to push it away. It will not. You can try as much as you want. It's very hard. There always will be something that will cause that fear in you and trigger that fear. Great. Let's learn to work with the fear.
I love that.
And it's completely different way of how I taught before. It was, the form, this is what is effective. Working with our fear is effective and within our fear.
I love that you're seeing it in your students and recognizing it for what it is. And instead of saying, don't be afraid, which was probably your first, it's just a noodle, don't be afraid, right? We have a tendency to say that to people. Don't worry. Like,
Don't be angry.
Right. Telling somebody not to worry is like telling them not to breathe, right? Like, don't worry. Okay, now I'll stop. Same thing. I love that was the change in your approach, was acknowledging that fear, not saying don't be afraid, but how can we manage this? How can you express it and still stand within it and stand up and work through it and find your courage? Oh, I love that. So that was our conversation. That alone was worth whatever it took to get there. Oh, I love that.
And let's expand it for a second,
Yes.
if I may. So I work a lot with leaders, and I have 2 decades of leadership management, and I was a manager at Intel for 2 decades. And what I've seen and observed in organizations and in leaders, me included, is we're used to work so much with the strategies, with the logic. We're trying to fix things. And we're not acknowledging the entire reality that is spread in front of us. We work with people. Emotions are part of being human. There's a saying, and I don't remember who said that we hire employees and people show up.
Oh, I like that. I need to write that down. We hire employees and people show up. And it's kind of like the other one. We buy from people, not businesses, right?
Yes. And we serve people, not businesses. And if we can expand even more, just on this specific idea, one of the core reasons why we are where we are in leadership and how people are liking or disliking or thinking that leadership is effective or not is how we approach businesses. I always use this question. If we take a big company and we remove the entire leadership layer, would the company survive? I think probably yes. Good chances that people who are at the lowest level will rise to the occasion and lead. Great. But if we keep the leadership layer and remove all the employees, the company doesn't exist. Companies are just made up figures. It's a construct of our culture. There's no such thing. I work for Intel. There's no such thing as Intel. There are the people who make Intel what it is. Mm-hmm. So are we looking at companies as a machine, a money-making, product-making, or service-making machine? Or is it actually a living organism? And I think it's a hybrid. It's a living organism that operates machines, whether it's software, processes, manufacture, whatever. But the core is a living organism.
With structure.
Yes. And that, just by adopting this point of view, this perspective, changes how we operate. Are you going to oil the machine? Or are you going to oil, or are you going to water the organism?
Right. And you have to do both. Like I'm thinking you oil the machine sometimes with certain policies to ensure that people are being treated fairly. Yeah. And then you water by encouraging professional development and compassion within the organization. And that just made me think of a couple of other things too. Just the way that we think about a business, and as somebody who is a buyer or what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody who's consuming whatever this business is creating or building or serving or whatever. When we make a phone call, say to Verizon, and have to talk to somebody at customer service to remove a charge from our phone bill or whatever it is, that same perspective can change how we participate in that. This is a human being that we're talking to. They may or may not be able to solve our problem. But if we are angry and we take it out on them, why would they advocate for us? This is a human being. Would you advocate for somebody who spit in your meal? Probably not. But if somebody...
They answered 10 calls like this of people shouting at them before you.
Exactly. And it's so fascinating that this is a great compliment for some of what I talk about when I talk about customer service in general is if you want to get good customer service, try being a good customer.
Love it.
And I always thinking... I always think about
to give away your rights and what you pay for.
And it's acknowledging that the person you're talking to is a human, which is your part of that, which is this is an organism. This is a living, breathing organism with structure. And so when I think about it, the suggestion I make to people is you're going to make a phone call to Verizon, or you're going to go to the bank, whatever it is, you write down 3 things. Before you even write anything down, you remember that you're dealing with a human being. First thing. The second thing, so you want to write down these 3 things. What is the best case scenario? When you finish this conversation, what's the best case scenario? Well, I get my money back in full. Maybe even with a little extra thrown in, right? Whatever it is, that's best case scenario. What's the worst case? What is the deal breaker where you're going to say, fine, I'm opening my account elsewhere. Close my account. I'm done. What is that? What does that look like? What will they say that would get you there? And then the middle, where am I willing to compromise? And what I find is that when we tell the person on the phone, this is really what I want out of this. This is why it's wrong, and this is what I want out of it. If they can't make the decision on the spot and they have to go to their manager, they're going to advocate for you.
There's something beautiful here. Your process first regulates our own emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And not just regulates, first it addresses our emotions and then allows us to regulate. And I'll never say that our goal is to regulate our emotions. That's not what I believe. I think it's something that we do regularly.
Mm-hmm.
The offer that I'm offering and through Nicholas's teaching is to step into our emotions first. Hopefully real time, not always we're skilled at that.
But when being conscious of them, acknowledging them.
Yes, allowing them. One thing that I worked with a leader once, that master of meditation. And when I work with emotions, and he's always cool, I could still sense the anger that he was suppressing for years over years. He found a great tool, meditation, to regulate his anger, but anger was there all the time. And when I named that, I'm happy to say that he allowed it. He allowed himself. We made it okay in the space of coaching to feel that anger. And then this anger was processed. He no longer needed this intense meditation. He's a teacher of meditation. He's doing an amazing service to others. So regulation is okay, but we need to know where it applies in our process. Those 3 questions, because we anchor ourselves in what we need, we listen to our needs. We have a conversation with ourselves, but what do I need right now in this moment? We also are honoring the other person. We're more responsive than reactive.
Viktor Frankl.
Exactly.
It's my favorite. It's my absolute favorite.
So I found, so it's Viktor Frankl, and also Stephen Covey talks about the trigger and action and the space between the trigger and the action.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm mentioning just because you just named Viktor Frankl. So the way I see today, and again, I'm humbled by these 2 giants and their way of thinking. is that everything they said is true, that there is a space between the trigger and the action. But this space is conditional. We can only touch that space and connect with that space if we are aware of the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
We are aware of what is happening within us when we're triggered, and then we can choose our response instead of react. And because you're chief story maker, I have a story about this.
Yes, please.
2 years ago, my son, who's now 22, he was just 20 years old, we're having a conversation about something about life. I don't really remember what it was. But as a proud parent, I wanted to take some knowledge and wisdom and shove it into him so he would be better and stop feeling the way he feels about something and change radically how he thinks about it. I know I have so many years of experience and I know what is true for him. So we're about 3 minutes into the conversation and he tells me, "No, Dad, that's bullshit." Now, if you were in the room, you would see this atomic mushroom erupting. And I went on a tantrum and I shouted at that moment at him.
Oh, no.
After about what seemed to me like half an hour, but probably was 30 or 30 seconds or a minute, I felt this tap on my shoulder. So I stopped my screaming and I turned around and my wife is there and she's asking me, "Hey, you're screaming. Aren't you the coach that works with emotions? How to sit with your emotions?" And it just woke me up. I was not there. I was running this internal script.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, let's go back to the age of 14. That probably was the seeds were there. My son challenged my credibility.
Mm.
When I hear that is bullshit, I also hear this is stupid, which means you are stupid.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the same trigger that I had when I was 14. You're not good enough. You're less than us. Humiliating me. So it's the same trigger. What did I learn? What is my program? How do I react to that? I attack. So that was the script. This is the script that I created throughout my life to deal with this trigger, to overcome this trigger, this unpleasant emotion. I stopped the conversation. I stopped my screaming. At that point, I said, "Son, I apologize. We will continue this tomorrow." I went to my room, to this yellow couch that is here in the corner, and I just sat and I allowed myself to be angry. I was curious about it. And I went back to that age 14 and discovered this is the root. Why am I angry? I love my son. Why did I scream on him? I was not in control. This is a survival mechanism. It's a program. It's
Fear.
A software. Yes.
Right.
And once I identified it in my body and what happened, that emergence of energy that exploded out of me, I could breathe. I can allow it. I could just allow it, be okay with it. When I say allow it, I'm okay with it, but now I can also recognize it. The next day I called him and said, "Hey, can we continue the conversation? I'm sorry about yesterday. I erupted. That was not okay. This is not how I want to show up. I apologize. Can we do it again?" Sure, why not? I think kids love when we apologize to them. They don't see us as, "Oh, you know everything." Well, not perfect.
Especially
yet.
20, because they know everything. You couldn't possibly know everything.
How could we? And we started the conversation again. After 2 minutes, he tells me, "No, that's bullshit." Once again, this rage bursts out of me. But this time, I can recognize it. I'm familiar of it. I did the work. I saw the trigger. And while I really wanted to scream and shout and go on my habitual way and run my script,
Mm-hmm.
that space was created now because I was aware of what is happening. I was in control. So I just took a big breath. I was still angry. I was allowing myself to be angry. And then just said, tell me more. And as he was explaining, I could calm down slowly. And so he's not telling you that you're stupid. He has his own opinion. That's how he learned at school to respond to things that he does not agree with. Fine, it's not about you. And we could continue the conversation. That was a pivotal moment, I think, in the relationship with my son, where now he didn't have a dad that just is dangerous and can scream at you, but someone who actually listens to you and can absorb everything you throw at him. And for me, it was a pivotal moment of, I can recognize my anger now. I can be angry and not act angry. Major shift. Major shift.
There's so many pieces to this story that I'm absorbing, processing. And one part that is especially important that I'm hearing is that trust that we've built up with a person in our lives, particularly our own child, and also with your wife, where that your son said that's bullshit. And maybe he was pushing your buttons. Maybe he was testing, how far can I get with this? And at first, you failed the test, right? You did exactly what he was intending for you to do.
Yeah.
And then when you took that moment and said, oh, I need to reconsider this response, and coming back and having him say it again, he's testing you again. And now you're building more trust. And it takes so much love, respect, and courage for him to keep pushing those buttons and know that your reaction is going to be different.
And it almost makes me tear right now, because what do we want for our kids? We want to help them grow to be responsible human beings, healthy, with values, and to be a good person in this world, a contributing person in this world.
Mm-hmm.
But we are work in progress.
And when you modeled that for him, at 20, you were 48.
Yeah.
And you were modeling that even in our 40s, we don't know it all. And that we continue to choose our relationship over our pride, our relationship over our fear and anger, that you matter more to me than me being angry. I think a lot about the relationships, how our relationships with our children and our age range are so different from our parents' relationships with us and their parents' relationships with them. And where I go with this is 2-3 generations ago, children had a lot of obligation to their parents. The expectation was that it doesn't matter how I treat you, you're going to have to take care of me when I get old. And so the parents, your grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, didn't have any responsibility in the relationship with their children because the obligation was there. They didn't have to worry about it, didn't have to think about it. No matter how they abused people, they knew that you were obligated to come take care of them when they got old. And that's changed.
It has.
And I think about that a lot in my relationship with my mother and how hard she works to have a relationship with me and my siblings. Like she has this, one time I said, she had tried to guilt me about something. And I said, I'm not going on that trip with you. You can take that all by yourself. And she got quiet. I said, I don't do obligation. And she said, oh, I know you don't do obligation, just like that. And I was like, you say that like it's a bad thing, right? To her, it's kind of a bad thing to not feel obligation because that is what forced her to do things for her parents when she didn't want to. And I said to her, this was a few years back when our boys were just getting ready to leave the house. They were like 16 and 14. And I said, here's the thing, Mom. When my kids come to visit me after they move out of the house, I want them to come because they want to, because they enjoy spending time with me, because they know that I'm going to feed them good food and there are going to be no strings attached to whatever help I offer to them. I want them to come to me without any obligation. She got really quiet. And that's when this theory formed in my head that now you and I, we understand that we are just as responsible for our relationship with our kids as they are for their relationship with us.
And as I am recently digging into my own relationships and seeing my parents' relationships and what have I learned? I didn't have any other reference. We see our parents and this is how we think relationship works. Showing our kids that they don't need to learn everything from us. They need to observe and be conscious in their decisions. And we have a responsibility to show them that. We're not perfect. We're working in progress that will never end. The journey goes forever. And they should go on their own journey and question everything. That's part of our roles that no one defined it for us before. I think it's a new generation role that we're picking up because we see the consequences through our therapy, through our coaching, through our deep inner soul process. We see how the environment impacted us and we don't want our kids to be impacted as well. We want to actually build their inner strength to observe, reflect, and make a conscious decision about some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the biggest gifts, just to add to everything you said about what we want our kids to feel, is that they can at least come to our space and be loved unconditionally with whatever decision they've made or path they chose. Because I think we live in a world of a lot of abundance. Surviving is, let's call it easy, although it's not really, but it's easier to feed yourself and maybe to get housing and even some shelter today than it was 50 years ago. Our parents really needed to struggle, to work hard, maybe two jobs just to put food on the table.
Mm-hmm.
It's a major shift in our psyche, in our perception of the world and role of parents.
I'm experiencing it a little differently. I'm experiencing it that I definitely struggled. And I graduated from college. I weighed under 100 pounds because I wasn't eating, didn't have any money to eat. And there was a point where my husband and I were doing really well when we moved from Washington, D.C. to Montana with a 6-month-old baby. And then we went through hard times again when his job got cut or, I was working part-time and then he lost his health insurance or whatever, went through struggles. I remember a moment where I was standing in the grocery store. My boys were 4 and 6, and I let tears start to dribble down my face. And I'm not a crier in general. It's certainly not in public. It's just never been a thing for me. And I remember standing there looking at the eggs on one side and the milk at the other and trying to decide which one I could afford. And it was terrifying. I never thought I'd be here again. When I was in this position, I was only feeding me. And now what do we do? And we got through it. Of course we got through it. We're resourceful people. And I could have asked my mom for help. I didn't even think about asking for help. It never even occurred to me to call my mom to say, hey, I could use $100 for groceries. Like that never even occurred to me. And we have gotten to a point where we're doing okay, but our sons are struggling. I told you, I think before I hit record, that our older son, their rent went from $750 to $1,700 overnight because the property sold. And these kids are struggling to find housing. They're working retail full time, and that is about 60% goes to rent. 60%. So there's no way to save. If anything happens to their vehicle, they're in trouble. They're just on the edge of getting health insurance, but with a large deductible. So I'm thinking about that next generation of, yes, there's abundance in the world. There's abundance for some. But what I'm seeing is that abundance is being sucked into this vortex of the super wealthy.
So with your permission, I would like to take a piece out of it and maybe we'll expand on it.
Yes.
First, thank you for sharing that perspective, and I can absolutely see that for many people. And what caught my attention in your story is when you had to choose between eggs and milk, you actually felt very alone.
I'll have to think about that. That's not the first thing that pops into my head. What pops into my head is feeling helpless. Not necessarily alone, but thinking in that moment. And of course, it passed very quickly. Because when we sat at our dining room table together, and my husband gave me a funny look because we were having leftovers and the boys were having cereal with milk. And the boys were super excited. This was novelty to have cereal for dinner. That was like, woo, cereal for dinner. It's like eating in front of the television, which we never did, or rarely. So it was a novelty for them. And my husband's like, and I'm like, don't even ask. But I had this moment of realization that as long as we were together, that's all that mattered. So maybe there is that element of loneliness. And I'm not sure I really felt alone. It was more like, I never thought I'd get here again. I never thought that I would be going backward to this point of struggle again. Have you been there? Like where you went back? Well, that actually leads right back to your fear, right? Like of even 2 years ago when you had that conversation, I never thought I'd be here again, this full of fear and anger.
There's a built fear in each of us to go back in times to those places where we could not hold the entire magnitude of that emotion. Mm-hmm. It was too scary. Although we are developing, our nervous system can hold more and more of that emotion. So we can today visit places in the past where it was too much for us. And sometimes we might not feel the loneliness, but we deeply miss the community that either we had or wanted to have. It says that it takes a village to raise a child. We live in a culture that praises individualism. You have to make it on your own, right? The American dream or the Western dream. And I can see it all over. It's and this is not just in where I come from in Israel, but here in the US. If I ask people 20 years ago, how many kids were outside? They would say the street was full of kids. They were outside every day. I spent my entire childhood outside with friends.
Me too.
Today, if my kid wants to meet another kid, there is a process for that. Oh, my kid needs to come to me and tell me, oh, I want to meet this kid after school. I said, great, here's a piece of paper. Here is the request. I'm going to write the request with my email and phone number. Give it to that kid. They will give it.
I need to meet your parents, right?
I need to schedule something in a safe environment where we could evaluate your kid and you to see that you're safe. And we're going to have a conversation about the weather just to see that you're normal enough. And then if that first date works, then maybe you can meet at again, a safe space where I'm present. What happened to, hey, I'm going to my friend after school? We're so much more isolated. We're so much more lonely. And in the past, and by the way, they see it so much in couples therapy today. The biggest problem, or I don't know if it's the biggest, but it's a very common problem in couples therapy today, is that we reflect all of our needs on our spouse.
Right.
You have to meet all of my needs. And of course, it's impossible. And then we fail. Then we have much more divorce rates. Because in the past, we lived in communities. The village provided all of our needs. Every person had a role, had a uniqueness that we could contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And we're moving away from that more and more and more, and being isolated and lonely. When we live in a
Definitely.
village and we don't have enough money for food, it's a village problem. It's not all entirely on us or just me and my spouse.
So tell me, as we wrap this up, we come back full circle, back to this idea of figuring out what was driving your desire to be better and better in your martial arts program. Changing how you approach teaching to acknowledge and embrace the fear of your students and your own fear. What do you think is the next era for you of self-development?
There is still in me a layer of terror that is both experienced, it's even ancestral. I'm Jewish and I'm Israeli. There are layers of terror in my history. Not even talking about the latest events that just add to all that, and seeing how us as humans can actually act in this world, how cruel we can be. So that is one thing that needs to be healed in me. That is absolutely one of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a very common theme that I feel many of us are carrying, is that we want to be loved. We want to be worthy. It has been said thousands of times in psychology books and themes and in therapy and wherever. But it needs to start with us. We need to start showing some compassion to ourselves, to our younger child, and to tell them it's okay. It's okay. We're evolving. So this is part of my journey, to hug my younger child more and more, give some more love. And by that, I hope spreading more light to others and showing more love to others.
That's a lovely and wonderful objective, because it's ongoing. This isn't anything that we learn once and then we're good at it forever.
It's going to be an ongoing journey and an adventurous one. And I'm very curious. I don't have a specific milestone to hit.
Right. Good.
Yes.
That doesn't work with personal development.
Doesn't work. That Japanese say the journey is the goal.
Mm-hmm. Unlike
I'm on the journey.
Weight loss, right? You can set a goal for weight loss. You can set a goal for eating better, but setting a goal for personal development implies that there's an ending to it. Agreed. Nir, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. It's been such a pleasure hearing your stories.
Thank you, Sarah. It was a pleasure to hear your stories as well, and such a beautiful conversation, heartfelt conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Listeners, now it's your turn. I'm curious. I would love to hear in the comments. What are you working on? What is something in your past that you've uncovered that has continued to create ripples, uncomfortable ripples in your life? What is the pattern that you can uncover based on an experience you had, like Nir's, of being bullied as a kid, like mine, of not being able to afford both milk and eggs that day in the grocery store? What is your fear, or what is generating something that has consistently created a pattern of disconnect and discomfort in your life? And how are you going to approach it? How are you going to identify the emotions that you feel as a result of it, the triggers that you experience as a result of that? And how will you embrace them so you can move forward? Please check out my podcast show notes at this episode at elkinsconsulting.com to learn more about Nir and his work, to click on his links and find out more about what it would be like to work with him. Thanks for listening.
That's the time. You must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.